It's a very cool thing to understand, although it's a dreadful fact. So there's a law of creative production called the Pareto Rule. And the Pareto Rule, sometimes you hear it characterized as the 80-20 rule. 20% of your customers will give you 80% of your business. Or 20% of your employees do 80% of the work. But it's way worse than that. Like, that's just a shorthand version of the law. The actual law is the square root of the number of people involved in an enterprise do half the work. Okay, so here's what that means. If you have 10 people that work for you, 3 of them do half the work. Now that seems pretty understandable, right? If you have 100, 10 of them do half the work. And if you have 10,000, 100 of them do half the work. And so what that means is that as your enterprise grows, the number of people who are engaging in counterproductive activity scales much faster than the number of people who are being productive. And so what that seems to mean that as a company gets bigger and bigger, its lifespan starts to shrink because it just can't be dynamic and mobile. And, you know, could that happen to Peterson Academy? That's what happens to most enterprises, you know, and that's also why it's very exciting often to be in an entrepreneurial activity in the growth phase, you know, because that's when everybody's dynamic and they're staying on the cutting edge. And it's very common for any institution to become petrified and sclerotic with time. And that's such an old problem that it's coded into our religious mythologies. So one of the most common religious stories, mythological motifs, is the evil brother of the rightful king. And what that reflects is the fact that any social organization tends towards, what would you say, becoming outdated and corrupt with time. And that has to be constantly battled against. Part of the way that the free market deals with that is that if you aren't profitable, you die. And so there's a death mechanism built in. And what that does is, it's harsh because your company can fail, right? But what it does is it culls the dead giants before everything rots. And the biological metaphor is a good one. And so, certainly it's something that could happen to any company once it grows beyond a certain point. It happens to bureaucracies, it happens to societies. It's a very difficult thing to contend against.